They weren't looking for anything. The deep space probe, Vigilant 7, was old, ancient even by galactic standards. It drifted beyond the map's spiral arms, past the radio dead zones where even pulsars refused to sing. Its purpose was more ritual than mission, an echo of curiosity kept alive by the Kareel, the universe's oldest species. Then came the signal, a whisper, not of sound, but of structure, a sequence embedded in the fabric of genetic drift, hidden beneath the noise of molecular evolution. Patterns no world had produced in over 11 million galactic cycles. A signature not just familiar, but sacred. The probe did not understand what it had found, but the eldest did. In the crystalline halls of Cariel Prime, beneath a sky that shimmered with artificial auroras, the Council of the Eldest gathered. 12 beings, each having lived long enough to forget the taste of beginning. They spoke in harmonics, minds bound through quantum lattice, voices layered like symphonies written across dimensions. They played the signal. Silence followed. Then awe. The genetic pattern was impossible. Its complexity defied the random chaos of life. It bore markers known only to legend, encoded structures from the firstborn, the ones who seeded stars, the ones who taught light to think, the ones who vanished, long believed extinct, long written off as the origin myth of all sapience. And now, this echo, coming from a world so obscure it was barely marked. A third planet around a yellow sun, drifting alone in an unstable backwater system. The locals called it Earth, a name so small it nearly collapsed beneath its own insignificance. And yet from that blue world, the signal rose. The Kareel did not send armies, no weapons, no message of domination. They sent watchers, a silent fleet, invisible to primitive eyes, hidden behind folds in spacetime, each ship encoded with protocols of non-interference. Their purpose, confirm the truth, observe the awakening. In the deep silence of the void, a storm began to churn, not of energy or fire, but of meaning. If the firstborn still lived, if their blood ran through the beings of this planet, then the great order would shatter. The hierarchy of millions of species of trillions of years would be undone by those who came before gods. What would they remember? What would they become? And did they know what they were? Humanity, meanwhile, looked up at the stars and saw questions. They marveled at galaxies. They launched telescopes. They built machines to measure silence. They wrote stories of visitors, never imagining they were the ones worth visiting. Children of stardust with no idea that the stardust remembered them. On the moon, an old rover sat half buried in dust. Nearby, one of the silent fleet's probes pulsed once. Scanning, not judging, just confirming. On Earth, in laboratories, some humans began to notice anomalies, genetic patterns that didn't make sense, mutations that weren't mutations but messages, repeats that weren't errors but rhythms. Somewhere in the Pacific, a child dreamed of places no human had ever seen and painted them in perfect detail. Entire structures older than civilization, worlds lit by violet suns. In a temple forgotten by time, a stone glowed faintly. Lines carved into it, once considered decoration, rearranged. Earth was not prepared, but Earth was not alone. The Kareel whispered across their network of stars, "They are waking." And for the first time in a million years, the old code began to rewrite itself. Not as prophecy, as memory, and the stars watched in silence. In the deep sanctum of Cariel Prime, beneath layered fields of silence and light, archivist Thalen Ru worked alone. It was not the kind of work designed for glory. It required stillness, patience, and reverence. Around him hovered data vaults millions of years old, suspended in crystalline time. Each one held fragments of existence, extinct flora, vanished star systems, obsolete languages. History not just recorded, but entombed. And yet tonight, that silence fractured. The Earth's signature had returned from Vigilant 7. Thalen Ru approached the scan with casual curiosity. It was likely nothing, some genetic fluke from a feral biosphere. He initialized the comparison against the sacred scrolls. The screen flashed, a match, not partial, not statistical, Exact. He froze. His tendrils quivered. The Earth signal, sequences pulled from primitive microbial strands and layered DNA helixes, was a perfect overlay of Archive Prime, scroll set a 0, the forbidden set. He tried again, running full spectrum alignment against pre-collapse mythology. The result was worse. Not only the genetic code, but fragments of cultural lexicons from Earth-matched ceremonial chants thought to be unique to the firstborn. Rhythms embedded in human lullabies, passed unconsciously through eons, mirrored ritual frequencies known only to the highest Kirill priests. Thalen Ru's limbs locked. He ran a final test, cross-referencing orbital signal harmonics with cosmic prayer patterns archived from pretemporal collapse. Matched. Perfectly. This wasn't a scientific anomaly. It was a theological earthquake. He stepped back. In his centuries of quiet study, he had seen the extinction of civilizations, the death of suns, but never this. Never resurrection. He opened the final scroll, untouched for over 10 million years. It was handwritten, organic ink pressed on preserved bark from the mythic alarin tree. Its first line, "When the children return, memory shall awaken." Thalen Ru didn't report the results immediately. He sat for hours in silence, replaying the lullaby recorded from an Earth village. Children humming unknowingly in tones older than their stars. The pitch was identical to the binding hymn of the origin. He filed an emergency seal under protocol Divine Echo. Then he wept, not out of fear, out of understanding. The humans were not aliens. They were not newcomers to the galactic game. They were the descendants of gods. The firstborn had always been treated as a myth, a beautiful fiction carved into the bones of early Kirill belief. They were credited with birthing time itself, with sparking the first suns, with crafting music into matter. Their disappearance was never explained, just accepted, until now. Data across Kirill Prime began syncing automatically with the new signal. The archives stirred. Scrolls once locked began to glow faintly, responsive as if aware. Symbols on ancient glass resonated. Then the lights dimmed. A failsafe, spiritual in origin, was triggered. A whisper passed across the lattice net. The thread is alive. High priests were summoned. The Council of the Eldest received notice with a reverence once reserved for galactic apocalypses. Yet they said nothing. Not yet. Not until Thalen Ru presented his findings in the Hall of Reflection. But Thalen feared this truth. He knew what it meant. Everything would change. Not only the scientific model of life's origin, but the entire Kirill identity, its purpose, its faith, its reason for guiding younger species. They weren't guides anymore. They were siblings, or worse, stewards who forgot the children they were meant to protect. He tried to rationalize, perhaps parallel evolution, a hoax, a recursive anomaly. But each layer of doubt collapsed under the weight of evidence. The melodies, the genetic cadence, the mythic coordinates encoded in Earth's own mitochondrial drift. This wasn't convergence, it was continuity. The humans were part of the first thread. They had survived something no one else had. Thalen Ru walked the Garden of the Still Echoes, an artificial park built to mimic firstborn landscapes as interpreted by Kirill theologians. For centuries, it had been just a tribute, a dream. Now it was wrong, because the real thing still lived. He touched the bark of a simulated alarin tree and felt the shame rise. All this time, they believed themselves the oldest flame, but the humans were a spark that had hidden in the dark, and now it flickered back to life. He stared at the stars through the vaulted dome. Did the humans know? Were they aware of their lineage, or were they still asleep, drifting in mythless dreams, unaware that the gods they wondered about were not above them, but within them? He imagined one waking up, not to prophecy, but instinct, not to power, but to memory. He shuddered. The firstborn had shaped the early laws of galactic order. What would happen if their heirs reclaimed the blueprint? What would awaken when they realized who they were? They arrived without sound. The Kirill fleet, 32 bioships folded into the seams of space-time, took position in orbit around Earth without triggering a single alarm. To humanity's telescopes, they were nothing. To radar, ghosts. To math, impossible. Yet they watched. Each ship drifted like a cathedral, formed not from metal, but from living latticework, glowing faintly with memory light. They had come not as conquerors, not even as diplomats, but as listeners, observers, witnesses to the forgotten bloodline awakening beneath cloud and sea. Earth, for all its war and wonder, believed itself alone. But it was surrounded. The Council of the Eldest named this operation Threshold, not a mission, a vigil. Inside the fleet, Kirill philosophers debated in song and silence. "Do we speak?" asked a mind-root elder. "Not yet," replied another. "A child must find its voice before it is taught its name." If they are truly of the thread, one elder mused, then revelation may not uplift them, but break them. They replayed footage of wars, extinctions, plagues. Humanity's history was full of rage, but also defiance, of beauty blooming in ruin. Could such a species bear the truth that they were more than evolution's whim, that they were not orphans of stardust, but descendants of divine fire? Across the Pacific, in a laboratory buried beneath Hawaiian basalt, Dr. Leona Mays stared at numbers that didn't add up. She adjusted the quantum gravity lens again. No change. 4 weeks ago, she detected a minor fluctuation, barely measurable, like the universe had hiccuped. Now those fluctuations formed a pattern, a loop, a breath. She blamed the hardware. She blamed fatigue. She blamed solar interference. But the pattern stayed, a language without sound. She began sketching it during her lunch breaks. Strange glyphs, arcs, spirals, symbols. She didn't know it, but Kirill observation logs had marked her long before the instruments noticed anything, because she dreamed. And in her dreams, she sang in their harmonic tongue. No translator, no transmission, just resonance. One Kirill philosopher named Aleth requested to break protocol and visit her. The request was denied. Still, he watched, as did they all. "She is not just receptive," Aleth whispered. "She remembers." One counselor replied, "She is a mirror, but mirrors shatter under truth." Aleth disagreed. "She is not glass, she is root." One night, Dr. Mays stood alone under the stars, eyes lifted not with knowledge, but wonder. She whispered, "We're not alone, are we?" It was not a question. And far above her, Aleth felt the words reverberate. Something ancient stirred. She dreamed again that night. In the dream, she stood inside a vast chamber filled with pulsing light and musical silence. Before her, a shape, vague but warm, touched her shoulder. "Not alone," it said. "Not forgotten." When she awoke, her pillow was damp with tears. And on her desk, her hand, without memory, had drawn a symbol. The Kirill symbol for threshold. Across the fleet, Aleth submitted a new request. "Not contact," he said. Acknowledgement. It was denied again. But more philosophers began to doubt the silence. They watched the humans build rockets, fight wars, cure diseases, ruin ecosystems, love fiercely. They watched them pray to gods who never answered, unaware that their own DNA was a hymn older than language. Still they waited. Each day, Earth spun forward. Each night, Dr. Mays checked the anomaly. It kept breathing. And still they watched. At precisely 1442 UTC, Dr. Leona Mays was midway through a lecture on gravitational anomalies at MIT. She was composed, as always, precise. Her voice cut through the hall like crystal. Elegant, sure. A chalkboard filled with equations towered behind her, mapping dark matter interactions with clean, elegant confidence. Then she paused. A silence fell across the room. She blinked twice. Her hand, which had just moments ago drawn a perfect arc, began to tremble. Without a word, she collapsed. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Students rushed forward. Emergency services were called. But Leona Mays was not unconscious. She was elsewhere. In the void between synapses and stars, a song played, not with sound, but with pressure, like gravity humming a memory. The Kirill had broken protocol. They called it a whisper transmission, a pulse sent not to the body, but to what they called the inner thread. Not language, not sound, but something more primal. a signal tuned to blood memory. Her eyes fluttered, her breath shallowed, her hands twitched, and then, slowly, she began to draw. The medics tried to restrain her, but her fingers carved shapes across the hospital linens, spirals nested in fractals, coordinates that matched no human system. Later, astronomers would find they mirrored the deep field structure of stars never seen by human eyes. At night she hummed, no melody recorded in any culture, yet familiar, to her and to the Kirill. One ship in the Silent Fleet identified the tune immediately, a sequence known as the Cradle Song of Erathion, sung by firstborn caretakers to newborns long before Kirill memory began. Dr. Mays had no knowledge of Erathion, but her dreams were filled with its symbols. She saw a garden that glowed with bioluminescent air, trees that whispered in color, a horizon without end. When she woke, she wept, not from confusion, but from loss. She had been there before. Some part of her remembered. She wasn't the only one. A boy in Morocco began building elaborate maps out of pebbles and bones. A violinist in Finland composed a suite that, when run through spectrum analysis, matched Kirill harmonic frequencies. A prisoner in Brazil painted starscapes onto his cell walls using ash and blood, images that traced paths known only to firstborn memory. It had begun. The philosophers called it inheritance awakening. The Kirill watched with reverence and dread. Memory was not just data, it was living fire, and now it was spreading. At first it appeared as scattered incidents. A linguist in Nairobi wrote a poem in a language she could not read. A boy in Thailand painted a series of murals showing the collapse of stars that had never existed in human history. A blind woman in Venezuela woke from a coma and described the architecture of the Kirill homeworld accurately. But then the dreams came in waves. Whole cities had nights of restless sleep. Dozens woke up humming songs that matched no known scale. Children recited strings of numbers that formed prime-based navigational coordinates, coordinates that mapped routes through gravitational null zones known only to the Kirill. Leona was their center, and their symbol. The media called it a breakdown, a mental collapse. MIT professor suffers delirium, begins speaking an unknown tongue. But the Kirill knew better. She was becoming what they feared and hoped for. Not a prophet, a mirror of themselves. A philosopher aboard the lead Kirill bioship wept upon hearing Leona's second song. She remembers the melody, he said, but not the meaning, yet. The council gathered again. What if we have awakened too much? Asked one. What if we waited too long? Countered another. Perhaps it is not our call anymore, whispered Aelith. The thread is not ours to bind. The humans kept dreaming, and the dreams grew louder. They descended like a memory returning home. The Kirill ships emerged from hiding not with sound, but with radiant light. Cathedrals sculpted from bioluminescent latticework, suspended high above Earth's atmosphere. No weapons, no shields, no demands, only reverence, only stillness. They took positions above 32 cities: New York, Cairo, Tokyo, Lagos, Rio de Janeiro, Kathmandu, others scattered like ancient fingerprints across continents. They hovered silently, perfectly aligned, as if orbiting something more spiritual than gravitational. Each ship began to shift, arching, folding, not in aggression, but in submission. They knelt, colossal vessels, older than human civilization, bent toward the planet. The motion was ceremonial, sacred. Across every skyline, the same message was conveyed without words. From the center of each bioship, a Kirill elder appeared in holographic projection. They hovered just above the Earth's surface, heads bowed, limbs extended in humility. And then, a single voice, harmonic, ancient, reached across languages and borders. We are not your masters, we are your disciples. You are the echoes of the first flame. The transmission lasted only 9 seconds. The effect was immediate. Nations froze. Fighter jets scrambled into holding patterns. World leaders demanded answers their aides couldn't give. Panic gripped the stock markets. Satellites tried to scan the ships, but their data was garbled, unreadable, bent by something deeper than technology. In the Vatican, an emergency conclave was called. In Mecca, scholars debated scripture through tears. Monks in Tibet felt a silent prayer, while televangelists in Texas shouted at empty skies. And yet, for many, it felt familiar, as though Earth itself exhaled after a very long breath. In Bolivia, a buried temple lit up for the first time in recorded history. In Ethiopia, obelisks long thought inert vibrated gently. Off the coast of New Zealand, an uncharted island surfaced, revealing carved glyphs beneath the moss. Archaeologists could not explain it, but children could. In playgrounds, they stopped and looked up. Some whispered strange syllables. Others wept without knowing why. A resonance had begun, a remembering. The Kareel did nothing else. They did not speak again, did not land, did not interfere. They remained above, kneeling, not to threaten, but to honor. And humanity, in the absence of instruction, was left to choose. Ignore it, fear it, or feel it. Across university halls and government bunkers, the question burned. What did it mean to be descended from the first flame? Dr. Leona Mays, watching from her hospital bed, understood what others could not yet say. She whispered to herself, "They're not here to lead us. They're here to remind us who we were." Somewhere deep beneath the earth, sensors recorded harmonic tremors. Frequencies matched only to deep-time fossils and meteor impact layers predating human bones. The earth was not just reacting, it was remembering too. In the Kareel fleet, no songs were sung, no victories claimed. They simply observed. Because to them, this moment was not a beginning, it was a homecoming. In old libraries, forgotten scrolls pulsed faintly with heat, as if stirred by relevance. Skies over the Pacific flickered with auroras that defied solar physics. An elderly woman in Siberia woke up speaking in a tongue her ancestors had buried. Global broadcasts replayed the message again and again, hoping to decode reverence. Ocean currents shifted subtly, their motion aligning with ancient mythic cartography. Pilots flying near the bioships reported feeling calm, as though grief had been lifted. Temples once deemed mythic rose from sand, their inscriptions now understood intuitively. Not a single ship cast a shadow, as if they existed halfway between worlds. Human art changed overnight, lines more fluid, patterns more recursive. Historians began to doubt chronology itself, unsure if humanity was younger, or much older, than once believed. They came in waves of fire, the unity of Dalkesh, the Javar coalition, the 11th Creed of Telm. Species that had once warred with the Kareel, now united by a shared terror. That Earth, the cradle of the first flame, might rise again. They did not believe in the reverence of the Kareel. They saw danger, not divinity, and so they struck. It began with orbital bombardments. Kinetic rods dropped from stealth cruisers, detonating over oceans. EMP bursts turned satellites into falling ash. Cities lost power, skies filled with thunder not born from clouds. Humanity, barely spacefaring, still more dreamers than explorers, could do nothing. Fighter jets scrambled, lasers fired into empty air. Nothing reached the invaders. Then, without warning, something woke. From tectonic seams and ocean trenches, great structures rose. Black rings of alloy, older than stone, spinning as if pulled by unseen instructions. 12 in total, evenly spaced along the equator. They rose in silence, then lit with symbols. The Echo Protocol had activated. Earth's surface defense grid, hidden for millennia, built not by modern man, but by their ancestors, came online. Humans watched in horror and awe as beams of light lanced into the sky, striking enemy ships with impossible precision. No one knew the targeting systems. No one understood the controls. And yet, the guns fired, and the invaders fell. In command bunkers, generals stared at the screens, speechless. No human hand had touched a console, yet the orbital weapons moved with intention. Some ships tried to retreat. The rings tracked them, fired, and silence followed. The Kareel ships did not assist. They only watched, kneeling in the light of unfolding memory. On the battlefield, soldiers felt warmth in their bones, not courage, recognition. The ground itself pulsed. Subterranean glyphs glowed beneath the feet of frightened crowds. Children pointed at the sky and named the shapes of ships they had never seen. Above the Pacific, a great arc of plasma formed and held, repelling a wave of missiles. A pilot screamed over radio, "My jet's flying itself!" as it dodged incoming fire. It wasn't humanity's technology that turned the tide. It was their inheritance. A ruined Capitol building reformed itself, stones shifting with organic motion. Hospitals saw unconscious patients rise from comas and whisper in languages not spoken for millennia. The final assault fleet broke formation, confused by the signals echoing from Earth's surface. Not machine code, not broadcasts, something deeper. The DNA of Earth had remembered, and now it was acting. The attackers didn't understand. They believed they were suppressing a potential empire, preventing another galactic hierarchy from forming. But what they had interrupted was older than conquest, more rooted than blood. One Telm war commander broadcast a warning to his fleet moments before his ship was atomized. This world does not resist, it remembers. And that was the truth. This was not a defense system born of war. It was one built from memory, a reflex of a species that once wove time into architecture and weaponized harmony. In orbit, the Kuriel closed their eyes as the last enemy vessel vanished in a bloom of violet fire. Their silence was not victory, it was reverence. On Earth, people gathered under open skies, watching the defense rings slowly dim. They did not cheer, they did not celebrate. They simply felt something ancient settle inside them, like a piece of themselves had just returned. In classrooms, students stopped drawing and began writing glyphs they couldn't read. In dreams, oceans whispered names that had no translation. Humanity did not win the war. It survived its remembering. The dreams became songs. The songs became words. The words became truth. Across Earth, the awakening accelerated. What had begun as tremors of memory became waves of recall, effortless, involuntary, undeniable. Humans everywhere began unlocking pieces of themselves that had waited in silence for millennia. In a small school in Kenya, a girl looked up from her desk and spoke, in a language never taught, one not heard since the stars were young. Her teacher wept, not because he understood her, but because the air vibrated with something sacred. She wasn't alone. Children across the planet began speaking languages no database could decode. The scripts they drew matched carvings found not on Earth, but in distant ruins on long-dead moons. Some sang harmonies that opened locked Kuriel archives. Others walked through sacred sites and triggered mechanisms older than their bones. They did not learn these things. They remembered them. In Istanbul, a boy walked barefoot into a mosque and began to hum. The tile beneath his feet glowed. Above the Andes, a woman traced constellations with her fingers, and the sky responded. Old Kuriel temples on far-off colony worlds began to pulse with amber light, as if exhaling after eons. A Kuriel priest on Thesa Prime dropped his staff when his temple doors opened themselves for the first time in 12 million years. What Earth remembered, the galaxy felt. Even the most skeptical empires paused. Warships stopped mid-transit, orders lost urgency. Because the flame was not conquest, it was clarity. It reminded species who they were before fear rewrote their history. It showed them that power was not force, but memory honored. Humanity wasn't ascending to rule. They were awakening to remind. On Europa Station, an ambassador from a rival species wept uncontrollably as he listened to a human child recite a forgotten vow of unity. The Kuriel did not lead, they followed, and in following, they healed. Every world that felt the resonance began to shed its silence. It was not just Earth that was waking, it was the galaxy. And the flame, the first flame, had returned, not as fire, but as light within the blood. Beneath the coldest silence on Earth, they gathered. The Kuriel ships descended in reverent procession, not above cities this time, but to the farthest southern edge of the world. Antarctica, untouched and ancient, breathed a secret beneath its frozen skin. There, under kilometers of glacial silence, they found it. A stone, not carved, not placed, sung into being. A singing stone, not vibrating, not humming, but resonating, with memory, with grief, with promise. The Kuriel fell to their knees. Dr. Leona Mays stepped forward. No one asked her to. No one needed to. She placed her hand on the stone, and the sky rippled, all across the stars from the dwarf moons of Raxos to the temples buried in dust storms on Harloon. Minds stirred. Every sentient species, friend, foe, forgotten, heard the same message, not with ears, but with their being. You have not been abandoned. You forgot, but memory is mercy, and mercy begins again. Gasps and sobs echoed from places where emotion had long been extinct. Old enemies lowered their weapons without knowing why. Children born in war zones suddenly looked to the sky with wonder. A single tear fell from a Kariel elder, one who had never cried in 7,000 years. The empire that had sent fleets now sent envoys, their hands open. Entire planets paused their revolutions, not in physics, but in spirit. For the first time in recorded memory, the galaxy was still. Hope, a soundless, nameless hope, moved through the void like breath. Humans, once ridiculed as primitives, now walked forward, not with pride, but with quiet belonging. They did not speak. They did not preach. They simply were. And in that being, something ancient remembered itself. The Kariel chroniclers rewrote their songs, starting with the line, "We knelt to the children of stars." Every sacred ruin reactivated, not as weapons, but as beacons. The first flame had not burned out. It had become blood. And now it burned again. Across forgotten colonies and derelict ships, old machines powered on, awaiting the touch of the flame-blooded. Even silence gained shape, because memory gave it meaning. This was not destiny fulfilled. It was compassion restored. The stars had never been lonely. They had only been waiting. And now, with each step the humans took, the void was no longer a void. It was home remembered. A final transmission echoes, not across frequencies, but across feeling. Do not fear Earth. Do not worship us. Walk beside us, for we remember the fire and will share it if you listen. No signature, no origin, just truth. The galaxy doesn't answer with words. It answers with stillness. And in that stillness, something new begins. Not an empire, not a doctrine, a remembering of stars lit by mercy, of peace that burns brighter than war, of children who became echoes, and echoes that became flame. The first flame did not return to rule. It returned to invite.